Watching News at Prime, let's get into this discussion now. A recent study by the University of Johannesburg's Centre on Social Development in Africa shows that most South Africans are no longer influenced by grants when deciding who to vote for. This is despite a number of parties using grants to campaign for next week's elections. Joining us is the author of the study itself, Professor Leila Patel, who's with us from the University of Johannesburg's Social Development Centre. Professor, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. A very bold statement made at the start of this particular article that basically sums up your study. And it goes, I just want to read it out for the viewers, over 26 million South Africans get a social grant. Fear of losing the payment used to be a reason to vote for the ANC, but no longer. I'd like to begin with the confirmation first from the recipients themselves. Is it them who said to you, whilst conducting this study, that indeed they voted for the ANC previously purely on the basis that they would lose, or they feared losing these social grants if they didn't vote for this particular party?
Yes, thank you for having me. So our survey has 3,511 respondents, and we asked grant beneficiaries, what influences, why do they vote to choose a particular party, to choose their party. And 4 out of the 5 top reasons related to socioeconomic factors, and 1 of it was social grants. So, I mean, I would say that we make the statement based on our previous research. This was the 5th time that we've run the survey since 2017. And in over 4 years between 2017 and 2020, this was not a factor in people's grant receipt wasn't a factor in their voting choice. But fear of loss of a grant if they voted for an opposition party was. But this is not the case in this election. So I suppose your question is why
exactly.
do we think that there's this change?
Indeed.
Okay, so the reasons I think are varied, but firstly, the grant system has expanded hugely since 2020 with the introduction of the SRD. That's the Social Relief of Distress Grant, which is a temporary grant introduced during the COVID pandemic. And the grant has been extended each year until next year, until the end of March in 2025. So I think that is a big reason. A lot of young voters, also young people, youth are unemployed, and they also receive the SRD. But I think there have been other changes as well, that grant beneficiaries, because of the expansion of the system, I think that they feel more secure, that their grant will now not be removed. They won't lose it if they voted for an opposition party. And we also see that a lot of opposition parties have come forward, and in their party manifestos, about 10 parties actually specifically state that they will, reform the grant system. They will increase the amounts that people receive, and some, have expressed support for the basic income grant and so forth. So yes, I think that those factors, reasons, partly explain the change. But the other most important thing, though, is that that grant beneficiaries are now choosing, more grant beneficiaries are now choosing an opposition party than was the case in 2020. So currently it's 53% who would vote, say they would vote for an opposition party, while in 2020 it was only 26%.
Very interesting indeed. And one of the questions that you put to the recipients as you conducted this survey, Professor, it goes, and I want to read it directly from your paper. It says, the level of trust in institutions such as the presidency, parliament, and in the ANC government. This was in line with that first question of fear of the loss of the grant if the person voted for another party. What was their response in relation to this level of trust in institutions such as the presidency and parliament?
Mm-hmm. So there are a number of factors that were highly significant in our analysis that help us to understand why people make the choices that they do. So the first is certainly governance, is trust in institutions, and those who had a strong trust in institutions were 2.5 times more likely to vote for the ANC as opposed to an opposition party. We also see that trust in the presidency has also increased significantly over the duration of our study, increased by 20%. In fact, at this time, it's 77%. But the flip side of that is also that corruption, those who feel strongly that not enough is being done to root out corruption, are 61% more likely to vote for an opposition party. So the reasons are quite varied. And there are also other reasons that explain grant receipts. So I think what is important in trying to unravel this a bit is to understand, the different reasons that exist and why people are choosing them. So trust in a party leader is important for people. Loyalty to the party, that broad freedom and democracy, would also 58% are more likely then to vote for the ANC than an opposition party. But the reasons are varied, and it's not, besides the ones that we've identified, you can't really isolate one only. A combination of factors explain, the voting behavior.
Let's talk about how varied the sample was, Professor. I'm talking about the people that were interviewed for this. And I'm putting a spotlight on this based on this, that this confidence, the level of confidence from the recipients who are saying, yes, we do receive this social grant, but we're not afraid to put our faith in the opposition parties anymore. Was that mainly from the townships? Is that the same level of confidence in the rural areas where those people who reside in the hinterlands of South Africa, did they show the same confidence?
So, as I said, ours was a national representative sample. It was a random sample, and it was weighted to the population. The profile of the respondents would be very similar to the national population profile. 43% are grant beneficiaries. So not all our respondents are grant beneficiaries. We're able to compare grant beneficiaries and those who are not recipients and their voting patterns. So we can compare the two and their reasons for making those choices. It's representative of small areas, provinces as well, and also a rural-urban divide, and 37% were unemployed in our sample. So, So I think it does provide a fairly representative view
All right.
of the respondents.
Let's talk then about one final thought, and again, it is raised in this article, the change in public discourse. How much of a contribution did this have? And when you talk about a change in public discourse, what kind of sentiments started resonating with grant recipients that indeed they no longer have to fear doing this?
Our views on this and our attempt to explain this is really is not what they told us, but it's our inferences that we draw from what is happening in the society at large. So if we take 10 years ago, there was a a very strong view that people who receive grants are dependent on the state. They don't want to work, that it, it induces, incentivizes teenage pregnancies and a whole range of other reasons of this kind. But I think that the debate has changed, and there's a greater recognition, a knowledge of the poverty reduction effects of the grants, given the extremely high unemployment levels and persistent poverty in the country. So we draw the inference from that there's greater recognition of the poverty impacts of social grants, rather than the focusing on its negative effects and stigmatizing grant beneficiaries. I think that has shifted quite a lot, especially when political parties, other than the ANC, has come out also in support of the grant system.
And I'm raising that question specifically, Professor, because politicians, and I dare say politicians from the governing party in the past, have been criticized for using such language as almost threatening those that depend on social grants, that if they changed their voting patterns, this may no longer exist, these social grants. Is that part of the reasoning when we talk about the change in the public discourse? Is that also in part because of politicians staying away from that kind of language?
Not really, because recently, or not so very long ago, the president said very strongly that there was the grant beneficiary should the fear of loss of grant would be is a possibility if another party came to power. So the president articulated this, and he was highly criticized for this by various public commentators and also other political parties, because it does instill fear in people, and it also kind of plays on people's insecurity about their livelihoods. So I think it is more about the grant system itself that has grown, and that I think that has given people a sense of comfort. But there's also greater knowledge of their right to social protection, social assistance. It's a constitutional right, and it can't be easily taken away. If a new party came to power, it could certainly redesign the system, but it would have to meet the constitutional provisions that those who are in need would qualify or be eligible for social assistance. So I think there's greater knowledge of people's rights to social assistance. The other thing is that in our survey, we gave people a range of options to choose from when they provided the reasons why they chose a particular party. And only 18% said that they would reward a party with their vote if they gave them a house or something in return for the vote. So I think that there is recognition that vote buying, that social protection is not necessarily about vote buying, but also about their rights.
Professor Leila Patel, let me thank you very much for your time.